Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Creativity and Competition, the Art of Building an Authentic Brand. I'm Karen Tiber Leland. I'm the president of Sterling Marketing Group. I'm a branding and marketing strategist, and I'm also the author of the Brand Mapping Strategy, Design, Build, and Accelerate Your Brand. I have a wonderful panel today, and we're going to talk about creativity and competition. But I actually want to start by saying, should it be creativity or competition? Is "and" actually the right word in terms of building an authentic brand? And I'd love to start with Joan Stone. She is the Chief Communications Officer of VMware. Joan, it's great to be with you.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here. I'm sorry. So the question is creativity or competition, and I see it as both. Brands are a living thing. They grow, they develop, they're impacted by all sorts of external factors, including competition and landscape. So to me, it's an and. We take creativity and bring our brand to life, and then we see it across the landscape, across competition and everything else. So it's an and for me.
Do you look at it though? Like, I know whenever I start working with a client and I'm working on building a brand strategy for them, I of course always do a competitive analysis.
Right.
But that competitive analysis in my mind is never meant to be you're better, they're better, they're superior, you're superior. It's more amount of seeing where is that unique branding proposition. And I guess I'm interested from your point of view in what you do. Do you really think of the other brands that are in your space as competitors, in the old fashioned way? Or do you really think of them more as people in the space and you each bring your own authentic uniqueness to it? I'd love to hear just how you see that.
I completely agree with the latter, that we all bring something to the table. We're looking for that spot in our customer's mind that we can occupy that's different and unique. And so much, in especially tech right now, is co-opetition. We partner and we compete in so many ways with so many partners and competitors that it is really a landscape. And so, we used to talk about competitive landscape. To us now, it's landscape, right? It could be a partner landscape, a competitive landscape, or geopolitical or social issue landscape. What place do we want to hold in our customer's mind? So that's really, I agree with you in that respect.
I think that's well said about co-opetition, because I think it really has become more of that kind of landscape. Gonzalo Brujó is the president at Interbrand. Gonzalo, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
No, definitely. I think, again, creativity is critical to compete at the end of the day. I think creativity is in every single thing that you in the customer journey, in every single touch point. You need to have creativity to make sure that you stand out and differentiate. So we must be as creative as possible, and we need to dedicate time to see how we can differentiate, how we can be relevant, how we can try different things, how we can commit mistakes to make sure that we capture the attention of the clients. So, and really need to work on every single touch point, from the employees to the financial community, to the product innovation officers or innovation teams, to everyone that touches your brand. So I think that would be the way to make sure that your brand grows exponentially.
What's interesting to me about what you said is I do think it's a matter of creativity. It's just that every brand within your space is creative in a different way. And in my mind, there's a customer for that kind of creativity. So I've had clients call me where I've had to say to them, you know what, I don't think I'm the right person for you, because the kind of creativity or the kind of brand they were looking for isn't really what I did. It wasn't my expertise. And then I've had other people call me where I am absolutely the perfect agency for them. And I want to introduce our third guest, Mariam Al-Foudery. Mariam, you're the Group Chief Marketing Officer at Agility, and I'd love to have you weigh in on this topic of, is it creativity and competition or creativity or competition?
I think it's definitely, thank you, Karen. I think it's definitely creativity and collaboration. So I think if you take a step back and you think about the complex issues that are facing companies today. And I'll just give you an example from our business. So we're a supply chain services and innovation company. And if I look at the issues that we've had to deal with over the last couple of years, we've had the global pandemic, which has also been one of the largest supply chain disruptions. any of us have ever seen in our lifetime. We've had, we have the issue of climate change, and again, logistics and transportation is a major contributor to global emissions, and therefore, a contributor to the climate change problem. When you think about these big issues and you think about how you differentiate your brand in this complex landscape, I don't think you can think about yourself as a sole actor. I think you do have to think of yourself as part of an industry, part of a larger and more complex set of issues, and how you think about positioning yourself also is about how you collaborate across the industry and with multiple stakeholders, not just in the industry, but also outside of the industry. So I think it's not creativity or competition, it's creativity, competition, and collaboration.
Fabulous. Let me be a little bit controversial here, which is that we're talking about competition, and all of us on this call, right? All of us on this particular panel, we all have competitors that we respect, that we cooperate with, that we might even refer business to. I know I have competitors that I will refer business to, and vice versa, depending on what's right for the client, right? Same as you all, we all have competitors where we will partner up and we will do projects together. But, and again, being a little bit just sort of controversial here, I also know in our industry, anyone can hang up a shingle and say they do anything. That is what the internet has allowed people to do. So whereas in the past, we might have only competed with people or organizations that were our same size or had been around and really had proven themselves, a lot of us have competitors now that aren't necessarily that good at what they do, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, because the internet has allowed people to just create a business and compete. How do you feel about when you come up against those kind of, quote unquote competitors? I'd love to hear some feedback from the group on that. And you all know what I'm talking about, right? I'm not saying anything that you're all like, what is she saying? So whoever'd like to just take that one on.
At least personally, again, I don't go. Again, I don't see our competitors, or I don't go to their websites, or I don't kind of really, I'm interested in what they can offer, really, at all. I don't think I spend from my day, or from a month, I can spend less than 1 hour. What I am really, really keen is understand what the demands and the relevance of our offering, and how we can do that by listening to the clients, listening the opportunities, see what is going on, what is happening with them, what are they needed, honest feedback on how we were doing. So usually, ideally, there is a lot of corporate politics, and sometimes we companies speak about ourselves, our teams, us, but the reality is that if you shift that timing towards the client, I think you will be better off. Remember that the customers move faster than corporations. And that is why the listening and co-creation will be very, very, very important in the long run.
But Gonzalo, let me just push back on that a little bit. Do you ever run into a situation, and I know that I do, where you get someone calling you as a client and they've been burned? They will say to you, look, we hired someone to do X, it didn't work out, so we're a little, gun shy now about moving forward with someone else. Do you ever run into that situation, and how do you handle it? Because I think there's a certain amount of creativity that's required in handling that situation as well.
Well, definitely, first of all, what I try to do is really understand what is the need. Because again, maybe whatever they are asking the others, maybe something that we cannot do or we don't do well. So I think you need to have, trust, the component of trust, and be human and be real and explain what you can do and what you cannot do without overselling. I think is very, very important. And really understanding what is on the head of the client to see if you can deliver with something punctual on the short term, mid-term, or long-term strategy.
I think that's an important point, because not overselling and, it's not the old days where we're like, yes, we can do everything. We can, you say yes to everything. It's really understanding what's the core of what you do really well, and then leading with that and only taking on business where you can do that core really well. Joan, any feedback on this or anything to weigh in on this conversation that we're having?
I think it's really interesting from a services perspective, right? From a consultative services perspective. And I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of agency partners we work with, right?
Yes.
And how they maneuver working with, a vendor or a supplier, if you will, in terms of how we see again, the landscape. We're a 22-year-old software, infrastructure company who has been operating for quite some time. In our world, the corollary is startups, right? We offer a broad portfolio. They offer a single product line, but we're competing because if that single product is better than our single product, they might win the business, but we're looking at it from a much broader integrated system, and looking to work with our customers in a much broader way. So to me, that's somewhat of a corollary, not specifically, but that's how I'm thinking about the conversation. If that's
yes. Mariam, how about you?
I was going to say that, it's interesting what Gonzalo said about not spending any time on competitor websites or checking out competitors, because for me, it's actually quite different. So of course, I think it's really important to stay close to customers, listen to customers. But I also think it's really interesting to see how the landscape is changing. So if I look at, our industry, which is a very traditional and established industry that's had a lot of, as Joan said, disruptors and startups joined in recent years, I think that it's really important to keep an eye on the shifting dynamics, because a big theme in our industry has been transformation, digital transformation in particular, digital acceleration throughout the pandemic, and sort of change. It's a changing industry, and keeping an eye on who's out there and who's driving changes, even if they're small. If you're a very large company and the startup space is a small space relatively, there's still a lot to learn, I think, from the new entrants into the field.
Yeah, just a follow-up question to that, Mariam, because we're talking about creativity, and we're talking particularly with you about entrepreneurs and people that enter this field. But do you ever find with those companies, those entrepreneurial companies, that even though they're supposed to be leading with creativity, that in fact there is sometimes a resistance to creativity within those organizations? I certainly have encountered that, where I'll be dealing with a client and they say they want the out of the box and they say they want the most creative, but really when it comes to it, they want to minimize their risk as much as possible. And I'd love to hear sort of your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think that does happen. I think it's really interesting to be part of a big company in this era, because I think you have the resources to experiment in a way that maybe the startups and the new entrants in the field don't. I mean, I'll tell you one thing that we did that I thought was really interesting. Years ago, when we first started looking at sort of digital transformation pre-pandemic, this is 5-6 years ago, we decided that we were going to create an internal sort of digital logistics brand within our bigger business, and we were going to run it like a startup. We were going to put a little wall around it, and it was going to be a startup. We weren't going to get it in its way, and we were going to let it grow. And we did that. But what was really interesting was that the senior leadership of the company also spent a lot of time with this in-house incubated startup, if you like, because we felt that there were skills that could be learned in both directions, but we had the resources to push and test the boundaries and the limits in the way that sometimes the younger organizations do not. So I think you're right. I mean, inherently risk management is always part of business. No, it's just a matter of degree.
Well, and it's interesting what you're saying, because this whole idea of creating sort of a bubble within a larger organization of entrepreneurship is a trend. I mean, I'm certainly seeing this trend in large corporations. Mariam, same question. Do you remember the question? I said same question. Yes, for you. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Joan, I apologize.
All right. I think that as Mariam said, I completely agree with what she was talking about in terms of from a larger company perspective, we have a lot more resource centers and a lot more areas where we can, do science experiments, if you will, in terms of how we bring product to market, how we change our go-to-market strategy, because we can do some experimenting in a more agile way because of the resources that we have. We see that across the board, and even as Mariam said, also, we're all in transformation mode. So trying out, again, new go-to-market opportunities, new ways to work with our customers. And it goes back to that feedback loop. If our customers are looking for something different, choice and flexibility, we have to pivot, and we pivot because our customers are asking for it. We pivot because those startups are doing it as well, because they can pivot faster. So but again, I think it all goes back to this whole conversation about listening to your customer, knowing where they're going, and working really hard to get there in an agile way to meet them and also exceed their expectations, whether it's through a creative go-to-market channel or whether it's through a creative brand opportunity.
Gonzalo, you don't work for obviously one single company. I mean, you consult with and work with a variety of large companies. How do you see this whole thing?
Well, it depends. So usually what I do is I try to understand the CEO's mindset, the board of directors, and to see what kind of culture the company has. I think this can give you indication of what kind of client you are going to be find, what kind of the decisions are going to be taken, what is the timing that you are going to be applying, what kind of a strategy, are they really customer-centric? Because again, probably 90% of the times that I speak with a CEO and the management teams of the board of directors, they said, I want to be a close company. I want to be agile. I want to be innovate. I want to innovate. But the reality is that probably from that 90%, only 10% they do that. So sometimes I describe, and this is something that I tell my colleagues, oh my God, this CEO is a financial CEO. So probably will not understand the importance of intangible assets. Or this CEO maybe is a brand ambassador, and maybe he understands the importance of working on how we can activate the intangible assets, the brands, the employees, the purpose, the strategy, which we think is very, very important. And I think this determines the kind of success and the trajectory of the relationship between us and our clients.
You know, it's funny because taking off on what you said, whenever I do a strategic brand offsite with a company, one of the things I'll do is after the first morning session, when we take a break, I'll say to the group of the CEO and the group of executives, okay, when we get back from the break, just sit somewhere different. Don't sit where you sat, sit somewhere different. Well, the brouhaha that goes on when I ask them to do that. And then when we get back in the room, I say, now look, all I asked you to do was make one change, which was change your seat. And look at how much drama there was over that. But you're saying you want to change your entire organization. Y'all don't even want to change seats. You know, you're upset about that. So I think there's the idea of change and the idea of innovation and the idea of entrepreneurialism and the idea of creativity. And then there's the reality of that. It's wonderful and it has great outcomes, but it's not all that easy to do. You know, it requires thinking differently. It requires behaving differently. It requires making changes. And I find that companies are often wanting that, but the action of doing that isn't necessarily that easy. And I was just wondering how that lands for all of you in terms of the work that you do as branders, as marketers, you know, in your positions.
It is very difficult to transform a company, especially for those ones that are in the stock markets, even more difficult because, again, some of them has been in the business for 100 years. And sometimes, again, you could be an elephant, but they don't know how to dance. And this is the complex thing to do. But again, you know, usually what I suggest is I think we need to go back to think, okay, great. So first of all, what is your purpose? You know, do you have a clear purpose? Because at the end of the day, in today's world, it is not about the money. So I wake up every day to work because there is something cool that we want to aspire, or there is a purpose that we have in our company. The second thing, what kind of trajectory you are going to, if you really want to transform the business, you need to define 2 or 3 trajectories that you are going to be using. The third thing is, are you going to create any iconic move for your company? So what are going to be your iconic moves that are going to be those creatives, iconic moves that will create something different and a financial opportunity for you in the long run, and you will create more loyalty with your clients. And then I think something super important is to really work on the culture, especially on the behaviors. You know, what is the employee value proposition? What are the behaviors? Because at the end of the day, you need your employees to make sure that they change with you. You, again, maybe you want to change, but you don't do it alone. You need to do it with your employees, and they are the first ones that they need to adopt the change. And in order to do that, there has to be a lot of education, a lot of learning, culture, strategies to make sure that they are completely aligned with your business strategy.
Well, it's interesting what you said about purpose versus money, because a lot of the current research shows that, a huge percentage of millennials in particular, they look at a company's purpose and values and mission before deciding whether they want to go work for that company. So the compensation and the benefits is, of course, a piece of it, but so is the opportunity to learn and grow, as well as the company vision and mission. Wonderful. Well, let's move on. Joan, let me start by asking you a new question, which is, I'd love to know what one of the biggest challenges you're facing is in your profession and your company, in terms of, like, what are some achievements that you've had? What are some initiatives you've taken on that you're proud of? And what are some of the challenges? Because, as Mariam said, we have economic, circumstances in the world today. We have war in the world today. We still have COVID in the world today. So we have a lot of multifaceted things that really are impacting the way we're doing business. So I'd love to know some of your challenges and your wins that you've had recently.
Sure. Big question. Let's just tick some of those off.
You can break it down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think from a challenges perspective, we've hit on it already a bit. Number one, from a speed standpoint, we've all sped up so much because of the pandemic. We all pivoted to a distributed workforce. We helped our customers get through it, all of those things. And we managed an employee base going through a pandemic. And every company has done that across the board. But within that, so that is a huge challenge that we've all dealt with and accelerated through. I think the backdrop, as we all know, as you're creating a brand and creating that space in your customer's mind, differentiation in a very noisy environment that we're living with is really difficult, right? Everyone posts content, everyone has a point of view, and making sure that your brand is consistent and aligned across tenor, tone, voice, because I spend more time on the voice side and how we bring the brand to life from a communications perspective than potentially the brand essence. That's one of the biggest challenges, right? Everybody is a critic and everybody is potentially a fan, and you're looking and navigating through all that. And some of the noise is fantastic and some of the noise is distraction. And so, as we said, brands live out in the wild, right? So you're always watching, monitoring, and pivoting to make sure that you're being consistent with your customers, your partners, and all those shareholders, stakeholders that Mariam mentioned earlier. I think related to that noise, as you said, employees care much more about what brands are doing and showing up with in terms of the geopolitical situations in the world, in terms of social issues. And, aside from making sure you have the resources and teams ready to monitor and respond and take a moment and look at what's going on in the world and then match that to your brand essence and how you show up, that's just another muscle. It's always been in the background. It's at the forefront now. So those are a couple of the challenges that we've been working through. I think from a standpoint of some of the wins, if you will, we've had some additional change in our company, some new leadership, as well as a spin from our parent company in the last 12 months. So we dug in and said, okay, let's go visit that company story, that company narrative again, right? And make sure that we are communicating consistently, but also using messaging that is resonating with our customer base first and foremost. But to Gonzalo's point, our employee base, right? Because those are our advocates, and we get there faster if all of our employees are speaking from that same narrative and understand what our opportunity is, both from a purpose standpoint and also from a mission standpoint of how we help our customers. So that company narrative and always having the muscle memory to go refresh it and check on it is a super important thing that we've been spending time on from a success perspective. So that's just a couple of examples from
that's a great example. I think especially the consistent company narrative. It's amazing to me how many calls I get from CEOs who are looking for some help with their branding and their marketing, where there is not that consistent company narrative. Even just visually, it's not consistent. Mm-hmm. It's not consistent across their social media or in their collateral, let alone their verbal messaging. Just a follow-up question for you, Joan, which is you mentioned about having to shift with the way things change in the world. I think one of the big things that's come up, at least in the clients that I deal with, is how much do companies take a stand these days? How much do companies and CEOs actually verbally take a stand about what's going on in the world. And, as you know, it used to be, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when you would say to CEOs, no, you just never comment on any of that. Well, of course, we don't live in that kind of world anymore. So I'm really curious to ask how your company has approached commenting on things that are happening globally, nationally, politically, et cetera. Do you have a company policy, or how have you taken that on? Because that's also part of creativity and part of what employees and potential employees are looking for.
Absolutely. It's very front and center. And we've taken, and it's an art and a science, if you will. And I mean, we've stepped back and built a decision tree that helps us with every matter that comes up. And the flow of how much does this matter to our employees, which is job one? How much does this matter to our customers? And what is our point of view on a continuum? And it's still having a decision tree and having a process to get through it. It is an art as well,
hard.
and in knowing, when and how, and what is our peer set doing? Does technology industry have a point of view here? Usually technology industry does have a point of view, or is smack in the middle of it. Because as Mariam said, every company is a tech company, and we're all going in through digital transformation. Whatever happens externally is happening internally. So it's an art, it's a science, and it's a dance. So lots of concepts there. And, we're always learning. And I think that's the biggest thing, is nothing's going to stay the same within this construct. So, using the decision tree and using the precedents, knowing that precedence is changing all the time as well.
I'm curious if you can tell us or not as you can, but I'm curious to know what part of those, what are some of the parts of that decision tree, if you feel like you can say that?
Well, I think that, we've hit on some of it too, in terms of the company values, right? If we have a set of company values we all ascribe to, if there is something going on in the societal issues that are smack in the middle of inclusivity, right? Or, I'm trying to think of other examples on the fly, that we have to stand up and say, well, actually, if we believe in inclusivity and we have a set of employees that are affected or impacted by this, then we have to say something or do something. And it's so important to do, not just say, because there's a credibility hit, right? We do, we believe in citizen philanthropy. So we arm or offer to our employees opportunities to do what they want to do with foundation money, things like that. So it's all kind of the fabric of how you make decisions on what you're going to say and when you're going to say it. The last thing I'll say is, there's power in saying things internally to help our employees understand where we stand. There's also a lot more power sometimes in saying it externally, and that's another big decision-making point, right?
I think you said something really important, which is, it isn't just saying it, it's the consistency of action that shows people where your money is, your mouth is, as that saying goes.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right, fantastic. Mariam, I'd love to hear from you, challenges and successes.
I think if I look at challenges for the last couple of years, the most obvious one has been this global supply chain disruption. So, massive crisis first in air freight, as planes all over the world were grounded and cargo wasn't moving. And then obviously in the ocean freight industry and, the supply chain. I think there was this amazing article that I read that said the Bank of America had noted that, the word supply chain had increased 4,000% in earnings calls over the last 2 years, right? As supply chain became something that everybody suddenly started thinking about. So from the perspective of being, one of the world's largest logistics company at the time, that has recently changed, and I'll explain why in a minute. But, navigating this global supply chain crisis, helping customers through it, keeping cargo moving. And we're talking about essential cargo. We're talking about, first in the early days of the pandemic, masks, medicine, food, and then as the pandemic progressed, vaccines, and sort of doing that under the most unimaginably difficult conditions that any of us had ever seen in our lifetimes, has been the challenge of the hour, or the last 2 years, as the case may be. And when we think about how we've risen to the occasion, I think some of the things that we're proudest of are the things that we've been able to accomplish in terms of what moved. Some of the first vaccine shipments ever were moved by our company, and so on, pandemic vaccines. but also in the very early days of the pandemic, where information flow was at such a premium, we got our experts from around the world to actually contribute to this online portal where we were explaining in a very detailed way, country by country in 60 markets, exactly what was happening in terms of air and ocean freight in that country. And so not only our customers, but humanitarian logisticians around the world that were trying to move personal protective equipment or other essential supplies, we're using this portal as a resource to understand, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit of movement in this country that I can take advantage of, or in that country that I can take advantage of, or, I can do this versus that. And that was a free service that was offered to everybody. And it was incredibly time intensive because it required experts on the ground and a wide, in each country, a large number of people to be basically doing these daily updates on this portal that we built. And, thinking about that and thinking about how we did that, I would say that there's no way we would have been able to pull that off if we hadn't spent the 15 years before the pandemic working on humanitarian logistics issues. So culture, values, these take time to build. That consistency that you were speaking about earlier, which I completely agree with, it doesn't happen overnight, and that track record, that history of doing, it's cumulative. So that in times of crisis, you can call on that and no one is surprised. No one finds it weird when all of a sudden you have, 24 hours to put up this portal that's going to explain the supply chain crisis in the micro and the macro to the world, because these are the same people the same senior logisticians who, when there was a flood or when there was an earthquake, were the people that were out there supporting humanitarian partners, run humanitarian supply chains. They get it. They know how to do this work. They've done it before. So I would say, that's sort of my reflection on challenges and wins, is that the challenges and wins come together, in the sense that it comes back to mobilizing what you're best at and doing it over a period of time, and then being able to do it very, very, very well during times of crisis. Our company has changed a lot. So we actually sold our biggest business division, which was a logistics business division, which I've been speaking about a lot on the call, in August of last year. And so thinking about how as a company we reposition ourselves as an investor in the space now rather than as an operator, but still keep those same values, still keep that same track record, and mobilize ourselves for the kind of action and commitment to the world that I think we've become very well known for over the last decade and a half in a new way and in a new space. And it's really interesting and also really hard,
One of the things that I really picked up on in what you said was that all the work you'd done prior to some of these events prepared you to be agile, if you'll pardon the pun, to be agile in terms of being able to respond. And I think one of the things that happens to companies is they expect that there's going to be an incident and then they can instantly be creative. And the truth is it's very, very, very hard to do that. If you have the foundation built up over time, then the creativity can happen. And it looks like it happens instantly, or it looks like it happens seamlessly. But the truth is it happens because you have a long history of building up that muscle, right? Those skills. And I think that's a really important thing to understand.
Absolutely. And Karen, I would also say creativity is distributed. In a large organization, in a large global organization, you cannot expect creativity to come from a team or group of people.
Right. So like the design department or
Exactly. So in order to be able to get sort of mass scale on anything, whether it's, a business pivot or, rising to a crisis situation or whatever it is, you have to have distributed the ability and the capability to do that over a long period of time, and that's actually really hard to do, but also so rewarding and so exciting. And the one example that I would give you that I love this, I remember the very first humanitarian logistics operation that Agility ever did. I led it in 2006, a million years ago. And what I love now is that I will find out about a humanitarian crisis somewhere in the world from our employees before I read about it in the paper. So let's say there's massive flooding in Pakistan or Bangladesh or an earthquake in Indonesia or a volcano that's erupted. We will get a message from our employees saying, in that country, saying, what are we going to do about X before it ever hits a headline? Because they're on the ground, they've seen it. And not only have they seen it, they know we're going to do something about it. And they're not, and by we're going to do something about it, they know they're going to do something about it, right? And that is powerful.
I was going to say that is the most powerful thing, because you've created a feedback loop internally based on trust, communication. It's fabulous. Thank you so much. Gonzalo, same question for you. What are some of the challenges you've faced, and what are some of the successes that you've had in this whole area?
Well, I think the biggest opportunity, I'm trying to be as positive as possible. We have two options: or look at the negative and better ourselves the negative side, or seeing that this crisis, we are going to bring the best of our people, of our teams, of our clients together to try to innovate as much as possible and to change the world. And I think that is kind of the focus that is going to be critical for us. The second thing is understanding the ecosystem of the relationships that you have with your employees, the relationships of your employees. They were working from home, they were working in the office. Now they are hybrid systems. So to really understand where they are, how they can be improving, how they can be happier. Again, mental health is a huge thing that you need to monitor as much as possible, because again, the last couple of years were very, very complicated, and it seems that is because of the war. We still have some clouds. So I think you need to measure as much as possible the mental health of everyone around you. I think you need to focus as much as possible on your people, on the work that you do, and what are going to be the new growth strategies. So people, how I can motivate my employees, how we can make sure that they are embedded the new culture, how they can accelerate with me, we can be as transparent with them to make sure that they are on board completely, how we can make sure that they are happy and they spend time, and it is not only about work, but they need to do other things beyond work. And I think that is very important. In the work side, new solutions. So again, I think focus was critical over the last couple of years. We were doing too many things, too many markets, too many bad products and solutions, and now it's time to focus to the right things, to the core, the things that we can do, the things that we can do well, the things that we can do fast. And the last one is the growth strategies. What kind of new solutions we need to bring to the table? Again, for example, we put together in the middle of the crisis a new discipline for inclusive design, which is great. Or we are working on brand ethics or brand integrity, something that we know that is going to be very, very important. Or we put together an alliance with United Nations to try to change climate change. It's nothing to do with profit, but this is something that motivates our employees and our clients. And when both of them are motivating, I think we go faster, or we transform faster the business. I think the biggest thing that is happening right now is that the brands have the opportunity to change, and they can be acts of leadership. Is what the brand can do. Again, before government, society, the institutions, I think we lost a lot of trust there. And I think right now the opportunities are for the brands. And I think that is kind of the biggest shift. So.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to pull out from what you said, some really important points. I think most of you are probably familiar with the Edelman Trust Barometer. And, when it came out this year, I think one of the big things that it showed is that not only employees, but consumers being able to trust a brand, being able to have trust in brands versus trust in governments versus, trust in other institutions has never been more important or stronger. One of my clients and colleagues, he always says that it's really about business as the leader in transformation in the world. And I do think we've seen this major shift where business is more and more being called on to be the one to lead these transformations in the world. And I think that's a very exciting and challenging opportunity. But there's something else that you said that I think it's it kind of is it's at the intersection of creativity and competition, which is when you look at, the great resignation, as we've been calling it, so many people, so many companies looking for employees, so many people wanting to change jobs, so many people not wanting to go back to certain industries. The statistics are pretty clear. About 97% of American workers, at least, they want some form of remote work. 63% of workers said that remote work or work from home is going to impact their decision to accept or reject a job offer. And I am dealing with companies every day that are trying to figure out, where is that balance? How do we maintain a creative, competitive business, but at the same time, manage people in a creative way if they're not at work full time? And just as sort of our last question, I'd love to hear everyone's, your point of view or your weigh-in on that. So Joan, let's just start with you.
Great question, and obviously very current. We take the approach after living through this pandemic, and as I said, pivoting to a distributed workforce pretty quickly. It's all about flexibility and choice. We are now not requiring our employees to be in the office in any strict or consistent way. So it's really the employee gets to choose. Now, that said, to your point, creativity and collaboration happens, and accelerates when people are together, humans are connecting, right? So we are also looking at ways, when do we bring, when we bring employees back to the office for collaboration team days, for, meetings, gatherings, networking, for meals, right? So we're looking more creatively to bring people back for that human connection, so that we can continue to collaborate, whether we're online or offline. But broadly, our approach right now is flexibility and choice. Let our employees work and live and be where they need to be. But again, working and learning and looking at the research and the data that's coming through day in and day out on how to bring teams together to collaborate and make that human connection, because we all know that is so important in a workplace and a community. So yeah. A little bit of both, hybrid.
Wonderful. Thank you. Gonzalo, same question for you.
Very, very difficult question, because I am in the middle to decide what to do next now. And every single week is different. I think, again, the environments that we have today in our offices, we must change those ones. We need to find entertainment moments within the company. So if people come to my office, the office has to look cool. We need to do things. We need to do a lot of culture, because again, the problem is that we were building culture for years and years, and maybe the culture can disintegrate, or maybe the culture is different because people don't go to the office anymore. So I guess that we need to find real moment of engagement between employees around the world. We need to make sure that the spaces are super cool. We need to listen to the clients to see how flexible we can be. Is 2 days, is forever, is 1 week. So I think there is some specific co-creation discussions that we need to do with employees. I don't think we can do it alone. I think we need to do it with them.
Wonderful. And Mariam, please.
So I think I have a bit of a different perspective on this one. So partly, and it's a reflection of two things. One is that the vast majority of our workforce is operational in nature, because they're frontline workers, they're doing deliveries, they're working in a warehouse and so on. So, a large majority of our organization continued to sort of work in person throughout the pandemic, not in an office per se, but doing their day jobs in the same way, very heroically and in very difficult conditions. So we have that large population to contend with. And then we have the fact that a huge number of our workforce is based out of emerging markets. And when we actually surveyed people last year, asking them about how they felt about working from home, we saw a real divide between people in our more developed markets and people in emerging markets. So across emerging markets where, there was less space at home, potentially in some countries in particular, particularly in some of our Asian markets, et cetera, where people live with larger extended families, there was more of a desire to go back to the office. So there are, I think, cultural and market-specific nuances to who wants to work from home or not. And then another very interesting sort of subpopulation, if you like, when you start looking at the data of what our employees were telling us, were women. So we found that actually, maybe counterintuitively, a lot of women wanted to come back to the office because the burden of managing sort of full-time childcare, especially since many countries in the world had no schools during, for more than 1 year. And you had a lot of women who were sort of managing the dual burden of trying to educate children and working at the same time. And the stress of that became too much for a lot of people. So I think actually there's, I would say, broad-based support in our business for a return to the office. And I think that there is, and my takeaway from that whole, discussion is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Actually, there are a lot of nuances in terms of how people think about their work. And what you have to do is ask people, think about principles like fairness. Is it fair to have, differentiated policies for the office-based staff versus the operational staff? And then balance that with some level of understanding that, some level of personal flexibility is very valuable, and that you can put, you can quantify the value of that in terms of people's desire to do it, and it's sort of a benefit and it makes your workplace more attractive. And somewhere in there, you find the balance, right? But I don't think, for our business anyway, in our industry, the balance is, do whatever you want. And I would say even hybrid, it's hybrid with more structure than maybe other businesses would think about.
Yeah. And I think that's a great place to end this conversation, because, I'm going to just sum it up by saying what you're really saying is that to be competitive and creative, you have to look at it situationally. And I don't think that's just true in your business and industry. I think that's true in all businesses and all industries. Well, that went very quickly. I really want to thank you all so much for being on the panel today. I certainly learned a lot, and you gave me a lot to think about. And I hope you've done that for our audience, which I'm sure you have. Thank you, everyone, so much. Again, our panelists today have been Joan Stone. She's the Chief Communication Officer at VMware. Mariam Al-Foudery, she's the Group Chief Marketing Officer at Agility. And Gonzalo Brujó, he's the President at Interbrand. And I'm Karen Tiber Leland, the President of Sterling Marketing Group. I hope you all learned something and have a great day.